Hey everybody, I'm back from Worldcon and it was fantastic. Oh, other than being sick the last couple of days due to my migraines. But other than that, completely and totally fantastic. I always enjoy going to conventions and I try to make it to as many as I can over the course of the year. With, of course, the help of my family because of the fact that we do the Ziggy's West thing. I recorded a ton of footage and I'm going to be waiting until I get back to my editing computer before I actually compile all the footage together and upload it to YouTube. And I'm going to be doing that. I'm still not sure exactly how I'm going to be doing that, but expect to see like the dealer tables and interviews, some general shots of the con, and then probably the last thing I'll do is I'll upload all the cosplay that I videotaped. So, last time I did a vlog, I said we were going to talk about superhero fights. Now, superhero fights are always fun. In most comic book settings, you have either one superhero or a team of superheroes, and the villains are essentially handcrafted to challenge those superhero power sets. It's fairly uncommon. You'll see it every now and then, but it's fairly uncommon to find a villain that is not in some way directly opposing the hero that they fight. In fact, arch nemesis tend to almost always have properties that the other heroes that the heroes they face tend to have direct conflict with. Whether you're talking about the fact that Lex Luthor is a normal mortal man who is just an extremely talented individual with access to a great deal of resources, and he's constantly the arch nemesis of Superman, who is anything but a normal mortal man, but doesn't necessarily always have the best resources or intellect for the problem at hand, to the fact that the Joker's anarchy that he promotes is in direct opposition to the more authoritarian perspective that Batman has, to just the fact that Magneto is in many ways a malignant extension or overextension of what Charles and the X-Men's own perspectives are. So, villains fighting heroes, you usually know what the formula is going to be. But because heroes are developed with power sets completely and totally independent of each other, when you get to fight a hero versus a hero, you get to have fun. Alright, you can be as creative as you want, and you can actually sit down and actually ask yourself, how would these two power sets interact? When you write a villain, you already know how you're planning on having the power sets interact. But for a hero versus a hero, you actually have to stop and ask yourself the questions and ponder out the possibilities. And so fans have been doing this, forever, and the comic book industry has been happy to oblige us with hero versus hero interactions. And the video game industry has also happily granted us plenty of situations where we can have our favorite heroes fighting off against each other, whether you're talking about slightly older games like the Capcom X-Men game that came out many years ago, or whether you're talking about a slightly more recent game like Injustice. We've had plenty of opportunities to explore these, and there are entire YouTube channels, such as Bat and the Sun, dedicated to the idea of what would happen if two heroes clashed. That's how compelling of an idea this is. And Hollywood, for the most part, has kind of avoided it. Now, part of the reason is for the longest time, with two notable exceptions in the Christopher Reeve Superman and the Tim Burton Batman movies, comic book movies haven't been particularly successful in Hollywood until now. With the advent of the Marvel Universe, essentially everyone is now chasing this idea that if they get the right combination of superheroes, or if they keep the superheroes that are popular in their own corporate stables, then they can use those superheroes to make a lot of money. But it was only recently that we started to see actual superhero on superhero conflicts in the movies. And we got two of them this year. We got Captain America Civil War and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. So let's start with Civil War. And I might actually make the Batman v Superman a different video. In fact, I'm almost certain I'm going to do that. So I think if you ask anyone, they're going to say the same thing. Civil War was the superior movie for superhero combat this year. Just hands down. It had better story, better acting. The fight sequences were much more enjoyable and felt much more impactful, and the movie dedicated a lot more to them. So let's go into a quick spoiler warning, because we are going to talk about some of the things that happened in Civil War. So, in case you haven't seen the movie, I would recommend seeing the movie first before watching this. But if you don't care and you just want a quick synopsis of the movie, again, spoilers, essentially you have the Avengers ending up fighting a battle in Wakanda. There's a disaster that occurs when Wanda loses control of her powers, and it results in the world really asking the question, should the Avengers be allowed to have the kind of authority that they have, the ability to operate without any oversight? In the middle of this, Tony is confronted by the death of a young, promising student who died during the events of Age of Ultron, which of course you can very easily say were Tony's fault. So he's confronted by his own laissez-faire attitude towards how much oversight he should have, directly resulting in the death of someone that he would have cared about, whose future was something that might have been an interest to him. And so you end up with a split in the Avengers, where Tony is pushing to have the Avengers support a bill that is proposed by the UN that would create oversight for the Avengers. Basically say, before the Avengers can act, a UN task force has to have a quick meeting and determine whether or not the Avengers is actually necessary, and determine how the Avengers can act with the least amount of collateral damage. I believe there, if I remember correctly, there was also something mentioned about the fact that the Avengers still haven't done anything about the fact that at this point the Hulk is still off the map and off the radar, which many people consider to be a bad thing. Steve Rogers, having started his career by essentially disobeying orders to do what he knew was right, is opposed to this idea. He believes that as the people on the front lines, they should have the ultimate authority to be able to react to threats that they perceive. Two fairly reasonable points of view. On the one hand, maybe there should be oversight for power levels that essentially no one on Earth can match at this point. But on the other, if they have to constantly go to knocking on the UN's door to respond to threats, what are the chances that those threats could escalate before the Avengers have a chance to stop them, and even more damage could be done. So the Avengers start splitting along these lines, and in the midst of it all, the president of Wakanda dies in an attack on the UN building where the hearings are being held. This, of course, brings Black Panther into play, and it looks like it is the work of the Winter Soldier. Steve knows better. He believes that something else is going on here, and so he begins pursuing these events, this mystery that's going on. And it's a very interesting combination of themes, because on the one hand, the movie really is a lot about Steve trying to help his friend. You know, it's got a very Winter Soldier feel, Captain America Winter Soldier feel to it in many of the scenes. There's a lot of intrigue and espionage, and this all gets blended into this conflict that's happening in the Avengers itself. Because now, Steve appears to be off the rails. He appears to be doing everything he can to help someone who could potentially be a heinous criminal, someone who we know is responsible for deaths before, which brings Tony even more into play, and as is, was indicated in a lot of the marketing, it brings Tony and Steve directly into conflict with each other. Eventually, it culminates in this amazing battle. Just this wonderfully choreographed, wonderfully shot, just rip-roaring good time of a battle where Steve rallies all of the people he can to try to help him get Bucky, to where they need to go so that they can uncover this mystery. Tony rallies all the people that he can to try to stop him, and it's almost like it's not a fight. Like when you actually see it, the people still keep the attitude. The heroes are still under the attitude that these are our friends. We don't want to hurt anyone. We're just currently opposed and at odds with our goals. And the goals are what are important, but at the same time, we want to see if we can end this as peacefully and with as little injury as possible. Of course, collateral damage goes off the charts as they essentially destroy an entire airport. But in many ways, it feels almost like, two groups of friends playing a game of football, with Steve trying to get the ball where he needs to go and Tony trying to stop him. Now, real quick, we'll go to a quick aside here. Tony recruits Spider-Man for his team, Peter Parker. So I just want to do a quick aside with that recruitment scene, because it's going to bring up a point in the next video when I'm talking about Batman v Superman. And that is how Marvel and Disney decided to handle, or more accurately, not handle, Peter Parker's backstory. They almost make a joke out of the idea that we've had this backstory told to us so many times. And I'm not going to say how the scene goes down, because of all the scenes that I don't want to ruin, this is one of them. You need to actually see how they handle Spider-Man's backstory in this movie. It's hilarious. But it should just be noted that Spider-Man's backstory is handled extremely elegantly, extremely briefly, and that's going to be a contrast you're going to see when I talk about Batman v Superman. So, eventually, Steve gets away because of the collateral damage that was dealt, and because all of these other superheroes opposed what was going on, opposed essentially UN authority. They're arrested and put in supervillain prison, basically. But while this is happening, Tony is slowly putting the pieces together. You know, it's almost like a part of him still wants to trust Steve and still wants to understand what's going on, almost needs to understand what's going on. And he begins to see how everything is fitting together. And this brings us to the climax of the movie, and I'm not going to say what happens in that climax, but essentially we finally get what is the real superhero battle of the movie. And again, the fight scene is beautifully choreographed, beautifully shot. You know, everything is just, it's like everything you could have possibly hoped for with Avengers fighting Avengers. I mean, you don't have all of the Avengers. Like I said, Hulk is not involved. Thor is not involved. But you've got enough of them who are lining up on these grounds. Could you imagine anyone even trying to tell Thor that it's like, by the way, we're going to have an earthly authority dictate what you can and can't do. You can just imagine, you know, Thor's laugh at that concept. So that pretty much covers everything we need to know about why Captain America Civil War worked. They took an interesting storyline, this mystery surrounding this terrorist attack, and what the Winter Soldier's involvement in was all of it. And they brought in an interesting conflict of ideas, a real, honest conflict of ideals, where it is hard to choose which ideology is the one that you need to go with. Is oversight necessary when dealing with a team like the Avengers, or is it more important that the Avengers be able to respond quickly to threats that they see? So you've got a good story, you've got good ideals, and after, what has it been? Almost, it's been at least, I think at this point, a decade, right? Of the Marvel Universe being built up. We know who all these characters are. We know them. When we see Tony, you know, getting in Steve's face, and vice versa, we know why it's happening. We've seen the tension building between these two disparate individuals with such widely different personas. We can see the clash just in who they represent. You have Tony, born to wealth, amazingly gifted as far as his intellect is concerned, using his technology to essentially become a superhero without actually having any superpowers, called upon to serve by his government, and he says, no, I don't trust you. I do not trust the government with my technology and with my rights as an individual. I am the one who is best determined to decide how this technology is used. And then you have Steve. Poor kid, you know, born out of the Bronx. No, sorry, he's Brooklyn born, sorry. You know, poor kid, born out of Brooklyn. Tried everything he could to serve his country. Literally lucked onto a solution that has now given him superpowers, made him, you know, something more than a man. And what did he do? He did everything in his power to take those abilities he's been given to serve his country and help his fellow man and help the troops that he was fighting alongside. Right off the bat, those two personalities and characters are just almost destined to come into conflict sooner or later. And we've seen the tensions rising, and we've seen how they represent these two different ideologies of, you know, rugged individualism and, you know, being true to your own ideals versus, you know, patriotism, but not unquestioning patriotism. Remember, you know, Steve was disobeying orders when he actually went into combat. So, you know, but still doing what you think is right for the best service of your country. And it was almost determined from the get-go that these two forces were going to have to oppose each other. They could not go unopposed for so long. So when we see that clash finally happen, it's been set up. It's been there. All right, we knew it was coming almost. It would have almost been an injustice for Marvel and Disney to not cover that conflict. And we got a damn good movie out of it. So that's Captain America: Civil War and how they handle the superhero fight. Again, I don't think you're going to find anyone who's going to say that that was not the superior superhero fight movie of this year. There's a bit more controversy when it comes to Batman v Superman. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to be very kind.